The night sky burned red with fire and the ground shook with endless blasts. Smoke and dust filled the air, turning every breath into pain. In the middle of that chaos, a human soldier named Daniel pressed his back against a broken wall. His armor was scratched, his body bruised, but his eyes stayed sharp. All around him, the war between humans and aliens raged like a storm that would never end. Daniel gripped his rifle tightly, his hands trembling from exhaustion. He was alone now. His unit had been scattered during the attack. Every sound around him carried danger. The distant roar of alien weapons, the cry of soldiers falling, the endless rumble of explosions. But then, through the madness, he heard something different. It wasn't the sound of battle. It was small, fragile, a whimper, a cry. At first, Daniel thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. The battlefield was full of ghosts and echoes. But then it came again, a child's sob, faint but desperate. He lowered his rifle, his heart pounding. Crawling through rubble and twisted metal, he followed the sound. His boots crunched on broken glass, and the smoke stung his eyes. But he kept moving. At last he saw her. Half buried under collapsed stone, a small alien girl struggled to breathe. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly in the dark. Her wide silver eyes were full of tears, and her small hands scratched at the heavy rocks pinning her leg. Every breath she took came with a soft cry of pain. For a long moment, Daniel froze. She was the enemy's child. Saving her could mean death if other aliens found him here. His duty as a soldier was clear: walk away, keep fighting. Yet his heart pulled the other way. She was just a child, scared and helpless, no different from a human girl lost in war. The girl noticed him, her gaze sharp with fear. She tried to shrink back, but she was trapped. Her lips trembled as she whispered in her own language words he didn't understand, but he knew the meaning. She was begging not to be hurt. Daniel's jaw tightened. He threw down his rifle and rushed to her side. "Don't move," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. With his bare hands, he gripped the heavy stones and pulled. His muscles screamed with effort, his lungs burning from smoke, but he refused to stop. One by one, he dragged the pieces of rubble away. The girl winced with every movement. Her small fingers gripped his arm, weak but desperate. She trusted him, even when she didn't know why. Finally, with a final grunt, Daniel lifted the last stone from her leg. She cried out as blood flowed from a deep cut. Daniel tore a strip from his own uniform and wrapped it tightly around her wound. His fingers were rough, but his touch was careful. "You'll be okay," he muttered, more to himself than to her, but there was no time to rest. Voices echoed. In the distance, alien soldiers searching the ruins. Their footsteps grew closer. Daniel looked around. He couldn't leave the girl here. If they found her with him, both of them would die. He lifted her gently into his arms. She was light, far too light for a child her age. She clung to his neck, her tiny body trembling. Daniel tightened his grip and started moving, weaving through smoke and shadow. Every corner felt like a trap. His ears caught every sound: the crunch of boots, the crack of distant fire, the hiss of alien voices. His heart hammered, but he forced himself forward. The girl buried her face against his chest, hiding from the nightmare around them. An alien patrol appeared suddenly ahead. Daniel ducked behind a broken column, holding his breath. He felt the girl's small heartbeat racing against his chest. If they looked his way, it would be the end. The soldiers paused, scanning the rubble. One of them raised a strange weapon, its barrel glowing. Daniel tightened his hold on the child, ready to shield her with his body. Seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, the patrol moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Daniel let out a shaky breath, sweat dripping down his face. He pressed forward step by step until he reached the remains of an old shelter. Inside, the air was still heavy with dust, but it was safer than the open battlefield. He set the girl down gently against a wall. Her silver eyes blinked up at him, filled with both fear and wonder. She didn't speak, but her tiny hand reached out and touched his chest right over his heart. Daniel felt something stir inside him, something stronger than war, stronger than hate. He had saved her, but deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the battlefield roared on. But in that ruined shelter, a fragile bond had been born between a human soldier and an alien child. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen, another pair of alien eyes had watched everything. Eyes filled not with hatred but with shock, and a mother's burning heart. The battlefield was still alive with fire when she arrived. Zira, warrior of the Kelith people, moved like a shadow through smoke and ruins. Her spear was strapped to her back, her eyes sharp and glowing faint gold. Every step she took was heavy with dread, because she had heard the voice of her daughter crying in the chaos. She had fought her way through enemy lines, her armor cracked, her breath ragged, but nothing mattered except one thought: find my child. Zara's heart hammered as she moved deeper into the ruins. Every instinct screamed danger. Human soldiers lurked in the shadows, weapons ready to kill. She tightened her grip on her blade, ready to cut down anyone in her path. But then, through the broken walls, she saw something that froze her blood. Her daughter was there, alive but not alone. The small girl was sitting against a wall wrapped in a torn cloth, her silver eyes wide and tired. And kneeling beside her was a human soldier. Zara's body went rigid. Her chest burned with rage, fear, and confusion. She expected to see the man aiming a weapon at her daughter, threatening her life. But instead, she saw his rough hands, adjusting a bandage around the child's leg. His movements were slow, careful, almost gentle. The girl whispered something in their native tongue, and though the human could not understand, he nodded softly, as if he did. Zara gritted her teeth, her pulse racing. Was this a trick? Humans were killers, destroyers of worlds. They burned villages, slaughtered children, and called it war. Why would this one spare her daughter? Why would he risk his own life to protect her? Her hand trembled over her blade. The right choice was clear: kill him before he noticed her. Protect her child. Yet her body refused to move. Her warrior's instincts were clouded by a mother's eyes. The soldier lifted the girl carefully into his arms again. Zara's heart nearly stopped, but the girl did not fight. She clung to him, her small hands gripping his chest as if he were her shield. Zara stepped back into the shadows, torn between fury and disbelief. The human moved cautiously, glancing around every corner, avoiding patrols with a soldier's instinct. She followed silently, every muscle tense. Twice alien soldiers passed close by, and both times he shielded the girl with his own body, ready to take the strike meant for her. Zara's throat tightened. Each second burned with questions. Why? Why would an enemy choose to save her child? What did it mean? Finally, he reached an abandoned shelter carrying the girl inside. Zara crouched on a broken roof above, her eyes locked on them. Inside, the human set her daughter down gently, speaking in a low voice. His words were foreign, but his tone was clear, soft, calming, protective. He pressed his hand over the wound, checking the bandage. The girl's breathing steadied, and for the first time since the battle began, her tears slowed. The child reached up and touched his chest. Zara's eyes widened. That small gesture, that fragile trust, struck deeper than any blade. Zara gripped the stone beneath her. Her warrior's pride screamed that this was wrong. Her people would never forgive her if she spared a human soldier, but her mother's heart whispered a truth she could not silence. Her daughter was alive because of him. From the shadows she studied his face. He was scarred, weary, his eyes sharp yet tired. Not the face of a monster, but of a man who had seen too much war. She expected cruelty, but she found something else. Resolve. Maybe even sorrow. The girl closed her eyes, drifting into sleep against the wall. The human sat beside her, keeping watch, his rifle lying useless at his side. He was not her captor, he was her guardian. Zara's breath caught in her chest. This was no trick, this was mercy. But mercy on a battlefield was dangerous. If the other Kelith warriors saw this, they would call her weak. They would demand the human's death. If her commanders learned the truth, she would be punished for failing to strike him down. Yet as she watched her daughter rest, her heart made a silent choice. For this moment she would not kill him. She would not break the bond that had been formed in blood and fire. Her golden eyes narrowed, not with hate, but with something she did not expect: respect. The human stirred slightly, as if sensing her presence, but he did not look her way. Zara slipped back into the shadows, vanishing into the smoke. The war was not over, and her people would never understand what she had just witnessed. But Zara knew one truth, as clear as the fire in her chest. The human had saved her child, and for that her world would never be the same. The night was not quiet, even after the battle had slowed. Fires still burned in the ruins, and the cries of the wounded echoed far. Daniel sat inside the broken shelter, his back against a wall, his rifle lying on the floor. His chest rose and fell heavily, but his eyes stayed awake. The alien child slept beside him, her small breaths soft, her silver eyes finally closed in fragile peace. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe. But he knew this peace could not last. Every soldier learned one truth about war: it always finds you again. He rubbed a hand over his face. He was a soldier of Earth, sworn to fight the Kelith, but here he was, guarding the child of his enemy. If command found out, he would be called a traitor. If the aliens found out, they would cut him down. Either way, he was doomed. And yet, looking at her, he couldn't regret it. The girl stirred, in her sleep, her tiny hand still clutching the edge of his torn uniform. That fragile trust held him tighter than chains. But outside, another storm was coming. Zara moved through the camp of her people, her face hidden in the shadows. Her armor was cracked, her blade still stained with the blood of battle. But it wasn't her own wounds that weighed on her. It was the image burned into her mind, the human soldier protecting her daughter. She had seen him risk death more than once, shielding the child even from her own people's patrols. She had seen him refuse to raise his weapon. She had seen something she could not explain. Now, as she entered the gathering place of the survivors, she felt eyes turned toward her. Warriors murmured, voices heavy with suspicion. Zara returned late, one of them whispered. Her child, was she found? Another asked. She kept her expression hard, her tone sharp. She lives. A sigh of relief rippled through the group. But then came the question that froze her blood. Who carried her back? Zara's jaw tightened. Her mind raced. She could not tell them the truth. Not yet, so she gave them only half of it. I did. The warriors nodded, some bowing their heads. But one man, a scarred commander named Kor, narrowed his eyes. And how did you survive so deep in enemy fire? Alone? Zara held his gaze, her golden eyes cold. Do you doubt my skill? Kor looked away, but suspicion lingered. In his face, she knew this was not over. Back in the shelter, Daniel stirred. The night grew colder and the wind carried strange sounds, voices in the alien tongue. He tightened his grip on the rifle, though his body screamed with exhaustion. The child awoke, blinking at him. For a moment she looked afraid, then her eyes softened. She spoke something in her language, a soft whisper that he could not understand, but he understood her tone. She was asking if they were safe. Daniel gave a tired smile. Safe enough, he muttered. But even as he said it, he heard movement outside. Shadows shifted against the broken walls. He froze, raising the rifle slowly. The door burst open. 3 Kelith warriors stepped inside, their blades gleaming in the firelight. Their eyes landed on the human instantly. Daniel moved to shield the child, his weapon raised. His heart hammered. He could take 1, maybe 2, but not 3. The warriors snarled, their voices sharp. Human, one spat. Thief of life, the girl cried out, clutching Daniel's arm. Then, before the first blade could strike, another voice cut through the room. Stop, Zara stepped inside, her presence filling the broken shelter like fire. Her golden eyes locked on the warriors, and they froze. "This child is mine," she said firmly. "And he—" She hesitated, every muscle tense, every eye watching. "Saved her." The room went silent. The warriors looked at her in shock. "Saved her? A human?" "Yes," Zara said, her voice unshaking. "Without him, she would be dead." The warriors shifted, uneasy. Their culture knew debts of life. If a warrior saved a child, even an enemy's, that bond was not easily broken. But the thought of honoring a human left their faces twisted with disgust. Kor pushed forward, his hand on his blade. "You cannot mean this, Zara. He is the enemy. He is death to our people." Zara's hand rested on her own weapon. Her voice lowered but carried iron. "And yet my daughter breathes. You dare question that?" The tension in the room cut like steel. The child clung tighter to Daniel, her silver eyes darting between the faces. Daniel said nothing. He only stood, rifle ready, eyes locked on the warriors. His mind screamed for him to run, but his body refused to move. The child was behind him, and he would not leave her. Finally, Kor spat on the ground. "This is madness. He will bring ruin to us all." He turned sharply and stormed out. The other warriors followed slowly, still glaring. Zara stayed behind, her eyes on Daniel. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crackle of distant fire filled the silence. Finally, she said in a low voice, almost more to herself than to him, "You should be dead, and yet, here you stand, with her." Daniel met her gaze. "I don't know your words," he said softly, "but I think I know your eyes." Her heart twisted. For the first time in her life, she did not see a human soldier as only an enemy. She saw a man who had carried her child through hell. Broken trust lingered in the air, heavy as stone. But somewhere in that ruin, a fragile hope had been born. The fire outside had burned lower, but the smoke of war still hung thick in the air. Inside the ruined shelter, silence stretched between Daniel and Zara. The alien warrior stood tall, her golden eyes fixed on him, her hand never straying far from the hilt of her blade. Daniel sat near the child, his rifle resting across his knees, his body tense but his eyes steady. Neither trusted the other, but both knew one truth. Without Daniel, the little girl would be dead. The child, caught between them, stirred awake. She blinked at her mother, then at Daniel. For a moment, fear flashed in her silver eyes, as if she thought this fragile piece would break in blood. But then she reached out her tiny hand, touching her mother's arm with one hand and Daniel's torn sleeve with the other. It was such a small gesture, but it carried the weight of worlds. Zara's chest tightened. Her daughter had never touched a human before. To the Kelith, humans were monsters, destroyers. Yet the child looked at Daniel with something more than fear, something close to trust. Zara's voice broke the silence, low and sharp. "Why?" Daniel blinked. "What?" She stepped closer, her spear clinking against her armor. "Why save her?" Her voice trembled with suppressed fury. "You are a soldier. My people are your enemy. You could have left her to die and no one would have blamed you." "So why?" Daniel met her gaze, his eyes weary but firm. "Because she's a child." Zara's jaw tightened. "That is no answer. Children die in war every day." His voice grew rough, almost bitter. "And it never should happen." The words struck her like a blade. For a long moment she stared at him, searching his face for lies, for tricks. But all she found was exhaustion, scars, and a strange kind of honesty. He looked down at the girl, his hand resting near her shoulder. "I've seen enough death. Too many times I couldn't save anyone, but when I heard her cry..." He shook his head. "I couldn't walk away, not again." The weight in his voice was heavier than any weapon. Zara's throat tightened. She wanted to call him a liar. She wanted to say no human could feel mercy for a Kelith child. But the proof sat right before her, alive, breathing, safe, because of him. She lowered her blade a fraction, though her stance stayed firm. "You do not understand what you have done," she said slowly. In our ways, saving a child binds lives together. To save her is to tie yourself to her and to me. Daniel frowned. I don't want anything in return. Sarah stepped closer, her golden eyes flashing. It is not about what you want. It is about what cannot be undone. My daughter owes you her life. That means I owe you more than I can ever repay. Daniel shook his head quickly. You don't owe me anything. I didn't do it for a reward. He stopped, words failing. His hands tightened into fists. I just couldn't let her die. Her gaze softened for just a breath, but then hardened again. Our people will not see it this way. They will not forgive you. To them, you are still the enemy. If they knew you saved her, they would call it weakness. They would demand your blood. Daniel gave a tired half-smile. Then I guess I'll keep moving before they find me. But the child shook her head, clutching his torn uniform tightly. She whispered something in her native tongue, her voice small but clear. Zara understood the word. Stay. Zara's heart twisted. Her daughter wanted him here. She, who should hate humans more than anyone, had chosen trust instead of fear. Zara exhaled slowly, lowering her weapon fully for the first time. You may not understand our ways, she said, her voice quieter now. But know this. What you have done cannot be erased. You saved my child. That means you are bound to us, whether you wish it or not. Daniel leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pressing on him like stone. I don't know your rules, your traditions. All I know is, I couldn't let her die. If that means I'm bound, then so be it. Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer sharp with hate. It was heavy with something else, an unspoken truth neither of them wanted to admit. Zara looked at him one last time before turning away. Rest, human. The battle outside is not done, and danger will come again. But remember this. Her voice dropped almost like a whisper. A debt of life is a bond of fate. You may not want it, but it will follow you. She stepped into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone with the child. He looked down at the girl resting beside him, her hand still gripping his sleeve. He should have felt fear. He should have felt regret. But instead he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. A fragile, dangerous hope. The night dragged on, heavy with silence. In the ruined shelter, Daniel sat awake though his body begged for rest. His mind refused to close its eyes. The alien child slept close, her tiny fingers still tangled in the torn cloth of his uniform. Even in her dreams, she would not let go. Daniel watched the firelight flicker against the cracked walls. His thoughts were a storm. He had broken every rule of war by saving her. If his commanders ever found out, he would be branded a traitor. If her people discovered the truth, they might kill him slowly. And yet, looking at her, none of that mattered. He had made his choice, and for once he felt it was the only right one. Outside, faint footsteps whispered through the ash. Daniel tensed, lifting his rifle, but he did not fire. He knew who it was before she appeared. Zara stepped inside, her spear still on her back, her armor glinting with the faint light. She moved like a shadow, quiet, but full of presence. Her golden eyes studied the scene before her, the human soldier awake, the child asleep, and the bond between them that even she could not deny. For a long time, she said nothing. Then her voice broke the silence. She clings to you. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. She's scared, anyone would be. Zara tilted her head slightly, her gaze unreadable. Children do not cling to fear. They cling to safety. Daniel frowned. He wanted to argue, but her words struck too close to the truth. The girl had not let go of him since the moment he pulled her from the rubble. Zara stepped closer, her armor whispering against the stone floor. Among my people, saving a child is more than mercy. It is binding, a bond of life. Daniel shook his head. I told you before, I don't want anything in return. I don't understand your traditions. Her lips curved in a faint, almost bitter smile. It does not matter if you understand. Tradition does not ask, it simply takes. She paused, her voice tightening. The whispers have already begun. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Whispers? Zara's gaze hardened. The warriors speak of it. They saw you with her. They know she trusts you, and they know our law. Some say you are bound to her, and to me. Daniel froze. Bound? What does that mean? Her eyes met his, sharp and unflinching. It means you are seen as something more than enemy. It means, by saving her, you have placed yourself inside our circle. Some believe that makes you my mate. The words hit him harder than any bullet. He stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. A mate? He had saved a child, nothing more. How could that mean this? Daniel's voice came out rough. I didn't save her for that. I'm not. I know. Zara cut him off sharply. I know you did not do it for reward. That is why it matters even more. Silence filled the room again, heavy and strange. Daniel felt the weight of her words pressing on him. Mate. The word was too big, too final, too dangerous. The child stirred, half awake, her small eyes blinking at them both. She spoke in her soft language, her voice weak but clear. Zara understood instantly. She says you should stay. Daniel looked at the girl, then back at her mother. He shook his head slowly. I can't stay. I'm a soldier. My place isn't here. Zara's gaze softened for the first time, though her voice stayed strong. And yet you are here, bound not by your choice, but by hers. The girl reached for him again, tugging weakly at his sleeve. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had survived countless battles, endured wounds, lost comrades, but nothing had ever made him feel so unsteady as the trust in that child's eyes. Zara crouched down, beside her daughter, brushing pale hair from her face. Then she looked up at Daniel. Whether you wish it or not, you are part of this now. Some will honor it. Others will try to break it. They will test you. And if you fail, both she and I will pay the price. Her words carried no threat, only truth. Daniel lowered his rifle slowly, his shoulders heavy. He didn't understand their customs, didn't want this bond, but he knew one thing. He would not let the girl suffer. He sighed. Then I'll face whatever comes. Zara studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. For the first time, her eyes softened, a flicker of something human crossing her alien face. In the silence that followed, the girl drifted back into sleep, her hand still holding Daniel's. Outside, the war still burned. But inside that ruined shelter, whispers of something new began to take root. Something dangerous, fragile, and unstoppable. A bond neither of them had chosen, but one they could no longer deny. The morning came with no peace. The smoke of battle still rose in the distance, but inside the alien camp there was a different fire burning, anger and suspicion. Word had spread faster than the wind. A human soldier had saved a Kelith child. To some it was unthinkable, to others it was dangerous. And to the elders of the clan, it was a matter that demanded proof. Daniel stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by sharp eyes and sharper blades. His rifle had been taken from him, his armor stripped away. He felt exposed, but he did not show fear. He had learned long ago that fear only gave enemies more power. Beside him, the child clung to her mother's hand. Zara stood tall, her spear across her back, her golden eyes unyielding. She had argued, she had shouted, she had demanded they honor the life debt. But the council had given only one answer. If the human wished to be bound among them, he must survive the trial of blood and fire. Daniel looked at her, his jaw tight. What does that mean? Zara's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. It is a test of strength and will. No outsider has ever survived it. Daniel gave a dry smile. Figures. The elders raised their hands, and the crowd fell silent. One of them, an ancient warrior with silver scars across his face, spoke with a voice like stone. The human saved a child. Such an act cannot be ignored. But trust is not given lightly. If he is to walk among us, he must endure the trial. If he fails, his blood will return to the earth. The crowd roared, half in agreement, half in hunger for spectacle. Daniel glanced once at the child. Her silver eyes shone with fear. He crouched down slightly, meeting her gaze. "It's okay," he whispered. She couldn't understand his words, but she gripped his hand tightly, as if to anchor him. Then they pulled him away. The trial ground was carved into the rock of a canyon, black stone scorched from generations of tests. Torches lit the edges, and the air smelled of ash. Warriors lined the cliffs above, their voices echoing through the hollow. Daniel was given no weapon, only his bare hands. His body still ached from the battle, his wounds half healed. But there was no mercy here. Across the arena, the gates opened and a beast emerged. It was no soldier, no warrior. This was something worse. A hulking creature bred for war, its skin dark and plated like armor, its claws glowing faint red from inner heat. It roared, the sound shaking the stone under Daniel's feet. Zara's breath caught in her chest. Even she had faced such beasts, only in stories. She wanted to scream to stop this madness, but her people would never allow it. If the human was to live, he had to prove himself in blood and fire. Daniel muttered under his breath, "Of course it's a monster." The beast charged. Daniel dove aside, rolling across the hard ground as claws tore through stone where he had stood. Heat scorched his skin and the air burned in his lungs. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. There was no plan, no weapon, only instinct. He had fought with nothing before. He could do it again. The creature swung its tail, smashing, through a pillar of rock. Daniel ducked, grabbing a shard of stone as it fell. The sharp edge cut into his palm, but he gripped it like a knife. The crowd shouted, their voices rising like thunder. The beast lunged again, its maw glowing with inner fire. Daniel ran toward it, not away. At the last second, he slid beneath, its strike driving the shard of stone into the softer flesh beneath its arm. The beast shrieked, fire bursting from its jaws. Daniel was thrown back by the blast, his skin burning, his chest aching. He staggered up, coughing blood. His vision blurred, but his body refused to stop. He had promised the girl he would survive. He would not break that promise. The beast came again, enraged. Daniel grabbed another stone, dodging, rolling, striking, wherever he could. Each cut was small, but each one drew blood. He moved not with strength, but with stubborn will, with the grit of a soldier who had refused death too many times. Finally, as the beast roared and reared back, Daniel leapt, driving, his stone deep into its eye. The creature shrieked one last time, thrashing violently before collapsing to the ground with a heavy crash. The canyon fell silent. Daniel stood trembling, his body broken and bloody, but alive. He spat blood to the ground, then raised his fist, weakly. "Still here," he muttered. The crowd erupted, some in shock, some in anger, some in respect. No outsider had ever survived. But this human had. On the cliffs above, Zara's chest tightened. For the first time, she realized something deeper. This was not just a human soldier. This was a man who would not stop, not for pain, not for death. And her heart whispered a dangerous truth. Perhaps fate had chosen him. The elders raised their hands. The human has survived the trial of blood and fire. His life is no longer his alone. He stands bound, the crowd murmured, shaken. Daniel looked up, meeting Zara's eyes. She held his gaze for a long, breathless moment. He had faced death with nothing, and still he lived. And in that silence she knew, whatever came next, nothing would break the bond that had been forged in blood and fire. The canyon was quiet after the beast fell, its body smoking on the ground. Daniel stood unsteady, his chest rising and falling, his hands shaking with exhaustion. His skin was cut and burned, his uniform torn to shreds, but he was still alive. Against all odds, he had survived the trial of blood and fire. High above, the crowd of Kelith warriors stood frozen, unsure how to react. No outsider had ever walked out of the arena alive. To them, this was impossible, unthinkable, but their eyes could not deny what they saw. The human had faced the trial and had not broken. At the edge of the crowd, the elders rose, their faces unreadable. One of them spoke, his voice carrying like thunder through the stone walls. By surviving the trial, he is no longer stranger. He is bound by our laws, he stands among us. The murmurs turned louder, half furious, half astonished. Some shouted curses, others lowered their heads in respect. The camp was split, hate and honor colliding like fire and ice. But below, Zara's golden eyes never left Daniel. Her daughter clutched her hand, whispering words too soft to hear, but her small silver eyes sparkled with relief. When Daniel stumbled back into the camp, supported by nothing but his own stubborn will, the people pulled away from him as if he carried fire. Some spat at the ground, others bowed their heads. All of them watched. Zara stepped forward, her spear resting on her back. She faced him in the center of the camp, the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders. "You have done what no other could," she said, her voice sharp yet steady. "You faced the beast with bare hands. You survived. The law cannot deny you now." Daniel looked at her, his face pale with exhaustion. "What does that mean?" Her eyes softened, though only for a moment. "It means you are bound." To her. She glanced at her daughter, then back at him. "And to me." The words struck him harder than the beast's blows. His chest tightened. He had saved a child, nothing more. Yet here he stood, called something he could not have imagined. The crowd waited. Tradition demanded an answer. Daniel shook his head, his voice rough. "I didn't fight for honor, I didn't fight for law. I fought because she—" He glanced at the girl, her tiny hand holding her mother's. "Because she deserves to live." Zara's heart trembled at the truth in his voice. She knew he spoke no lie, and perhaps that was what made her next words heavier than stone. "In our way," she said slowly, her voice carrying to every ear, "when a life debt binds us and when the bond is tested by fire and survives, there is only one name left to give." The elders watched in silence. The warriors leaned forward. Even the child held her breath. Zara stepped closer, until she stood only a pace away from him, her golden eyes locked with his weary human gaze. Her hand rested lightly on her daughter's shoulder. She spoke, her voice unshaking. "Mate." The camp fell silent. The word was not shouted. It was not forced. It was chosen. For the first time, Daniel felt the true weight of what he had done. He had not just saved a child. He had stepped into a world where his actions tied him to something greater than himself. He was no longer just a soldier. He was bound by a word that carried fire, tradition, and something deeper he dared not name. The child let out a soft sound, smiling faintly, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Her tiny hand reached for Daniel again, and he took it without hesitation. The crowd stirred. Some warriors turned away in disgust. Others bowed their heads, accepting the choice. But none dared break the silence of the moment. Daniel exhaled slowly, his chest heavy with the weight of it all. "I never asked for this," he said quietly. "But if it means she's safe, if it means you're safe, then I'll carry it." Zara studied him for a long, still moment. Then, for the first time since the war began, she allowed herself the smallest smile. "You already have," she whispered. The bond was sealed, not with weapons, not with blood, but with choice. Outside the camp, the fires of war still burned. But here, in the heart of the Kelith, a human and an alien stood together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something new, something dangerous, something unstoppable. And as the stars shone above the ruined world, Daniel realized that his life would never again belong only to him. It now belonged to them.